I remember that afternoon with startling clarity, though at first it felt like any other. The house was quiet, too quiet, the sort of silence that makes you notice the hum of the refrigerator or the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway. My partner, Daniel, had left earlier in the week for a business trip. He had kissed me on the cheek with the distracted air of someone already halfway out the door. The gesture lingered with me, not for its tenderness, but for how little it stirred. Loneliness has a way of seeping into the walls, into the furniture, even into the air you breathe. By noon, I had scrolled mindlessly through my phone, stared at the muted television, and made coffee I never finished. I wasn't looking for company that day, certainly not the kind I eventually found. The knock on the door startled me. It was firm, deliberate, not the hesitant tap of a delivery man. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity overruled. When I opened the door, two men stood on the porch. The first one, tall and striking, carried himself with an assuredness that immediately filled the small space between us. His dark hair was neatly styled, his smile easy, almost rehearsed. The second man stood just behind him, slightly shorter, softer around the edges, his expression open and attentive. They introduced themselves quickly, Adrian and Mark, and explained that they were new in the neighborhood, visiting a friend a few houses down, but the friend wasn't home. I should have wished them well and closed the door, but something in their manner disarmed me. Adrian's confidence contrasted perfectly with Mark's quiet warmth. Together, they radiated a kind of effortless charm. "You live here alone?" Adrian asked, glancing past me into the hallway. The question caught me off guard. "No," I said, then hesitated. "My partner's away at the moment." Adrian's eyes lingered on mine just a second too long, the kind of pause that suggests more than polite interest. Mark, noticing, gave a small smile as though apologizing for his friend's boldness. Yet even he seemed to study me with a curiosity that felt uncomfortably intimate. We talked casually for a few minutes about the neighborhood, the quiet street, the weather. Nothing of importance. Still, the air felt charged, like something unspoken was threading its way through each exchange. When Mark laughed at a comment I made, his gaze held mine in a way that suggested he was listening not just to my words, but to the silences around them. I hadn't felt that kind of attentiveness from Daniel in months, maybe longer. I became aware of my own posture, the way I leaned on the doorframe, suddenly conscious of the hollowness of the house behind me. Part of me knew I should close the door politely and end the encounter before it unraveled into something complicated. But another part, lonelier, hungrier, kept the conversation alive. Adrian shifted, his hand brushing against the edge of the door as if testing a boundary. "We don't mean to intrude," he said smoothly, "but it feels rude standing out here when you've been so kind." Mark added softly, "We could join you for a drink if you don't mind." The suggestion was innocent enough, yet the tone was not. My pulse quickened, and I felt that dangerous tug between instinct and desire. I thought of Daniel, his absent smile, his perfunctory goodbye, and guilt pricked at the edges of my thoughts. Still, the silence of the house loomed behind me, pressing in like a weight. I stepped back from the doorway, giving them space to enter. The decision was small, almost casual in appearance, but in that moment something shifted. "Come in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The threshold closed behind them, and with it, the last remnants of certainty I had about how the day would end. The moment Adrian and Mark stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The house, which only an hour earlier had felt cavernous and hollow, suddenly seemed alive. I led them into the living room, where the late afternoon light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting slanted shadows across the floor. Adrian moved first, his presence commanding, scanning the room with curious eyes. Mark followed, more quietly, taking in the details as though he were memorizing them. "Nice place," Adrian remarked, lowering himself into the armchair. His tone carried that same casual confidence, but his gaze lingered on me longer than his words required. Mark smiled, settling on the sofa. "Feels warm, even with all this silence." The remark was innocent, Yet it pierced deeper than I expected. Silence. That was what had been haunting me. Silence in the evenings when Daniel stayed late at the office. Silence in the mornings when we passed each other like strangers. Silence that made this sudden company feel almost intoxicating. I fetched glasses from the kitchen, pouring what little wine we had left. My hands shook slightly as I set them down, a tremor of nerves I tried to mask with a forced smile. Adrian accepted his glass with a nod, while Mark's fingers brushed mine briefly when he took his. The touch was fleeting, but it sent an unexpected shiver through me. Conversation unfolded easily, as if we were old acquaintances. Adrian spoke of travels, his words animated, his gestures expansive. Mark listened attentively, chiming in with gentle observations. Yet, despite their words, I felt the current beneath it all, the subtle shift in glances, the pauses that stretched just a heartbeat longer than normal. "You seem restless," Adrian said at one point, his voice lower now, more direct. I hesitated, caught between honesty and deflection. Maybe I am. Daniel's away. The house feels empty without him. Mark tilted his head, his eyes softening. That kind of loneliness is heavy, sometimes heavier than we realize. His empathy disarmed me. I hadn't admitted my loneliness aloud in months, not even to myself. Hearing it acknowledged by a stranger left me exposed, but strangely comforted. The wine loosened my words, and I found myself revealing more than I should have, how Daniel and I had grown distant, how I felt invisible in my own relationship. Adrian listened with a knowing smile, while Mark's expression was almost tender. "You deserve to feel seen," Mark said quietly. The words landed with startling weight. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with longing. Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee. Maybe today isn't about being alone. The room grew warmer, though I wasn't sure if it was the wine, the fading light, or the intensity of their presence. Adrian's eyes never left mine, daring me to acknowledge the possibility hidden in his suggestion. Mark's silence was no less powerful. His gaze held me with a gentleness that contrasted Adrian's boldness. The first touch came almost accidentally. Mark's hand brushed against mine again, this time lingering. I didn't pull away. Adrian watched, a faint smile tugging at his lips, as though he had been waiting for this very moment. A storm brewed inside me, loyalty to Daniel clashing with a desperate hunger I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was just harmless closeness, that nothing had crossed the line yet. But deep down, I knew the line had already blurred the second I invited them in. Mark leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to explain yourself." The words unraveled what little resistance remained. His lips touched mine softly at first, tentative testing. My body stiffened with shock, but the jolt quickly gave way to a rush of desire so sharp it frightened me. Adrian rose from his chair, stepping nearer, his presence amplifying the heat already coiling in the room. I could feel my resolve crumbling, the weight of Daniel's absence dissolving into the immediacy of the moment. By the time I pulled back, breathless and trembling, the choice had already been made. The evening stretched ahead like a precipice, and I had already taken the first step over the edge. Morning arrived with a hush that felt heavier than the silence of the day before. The living room was a tableau of disarray. Wine glasses half empty on the table, cushions askew, a faint trace of cologne lingering in the air. Adrian and Mark were gone. Their absence was sharp, immediate, like waking from a fevered dream. I stood barefoot on the cool wooden floor, staring at the evidence of what had happened. My lips still tingled faintly, my skin carried the memory of touch, and yet my chest ached with something closer to regret than satisfaction. For a moment, I let myself replay fragments of the night. Mark's soft laugh, Adrian's steady gaze, the way I had felt wanted, truly wanted for the first time in longer than I cared to admit. It was intoxicating, but the sweetness quickly curdled. I thought of Daniel, his suitcase neatly packed before he left, his kiss on my cheek, perfunctory but still loyal, his trust, silent and unspoken, now violated in the very home we shared. The guilt struck hard, pressing against my ribs like a physical weight. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it had been loneliness, not betrayal, need, not choice. But excuses rang hollow in the stillness of the room. I gathered the glasses and carried them to the sink. The clink of glass against porcelain echoed, louder than expected, like an accusation. My reflection caught in the kitchen window, pale, tired, and unfamiliar. I barely recognized myself. Mark's words lingered in my mind. You deserve to feel seen. For one night, I had believed it. But now I questioned whether it had been truth or just a lure, an indulgence that left me emptier in its wake. By midday, Daniel called. His voice was cheerful, casual, unaware. Just checking in, he said, his tone carrying that distracted affection I had grown used to. My throat tightened as I responded with practiced steadiness, the lie of normalcy threading through every word. As we spoke, my eyes fell on the sofa where Mark had sat, his smile gentle and disarming. I imagined Daniel standing there instead, watching me with the trust one had fractured. My stomach twisted, the rest of the day blurred. I moved through chores mechanically, folding laundry, wiping counters, straightening the mess that no amount of cleaning could truly erase. Shadows lengthened across the walls, and with them, the weight of memory grew darker. When Daniel returned days later, he brought with him the same quiet energy, the same half-hearted warmth. He kissed me in the kitchen, just as he had before leaving, and I forced a smile. He did not notice the strain behind it. Or maybe he did and chose not to look closer. In the nights that followed, I lay awake beside him, my body stiff with secrets. The memory of Adrian and Mark replayed in flashes, an intoxicating mix of tenderness and recklessness. The thrill of it haunted me, but so did the shame. I had crossed a line that could not be undone. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, a one-time escape, but the truth was harsher. I had wanted it. And in wanting, I had betrayed. Yet, even in my guilt, a quiet yearning remained, a craving for that intensity, that raw sense of being alive. It was dangerous, shameful, but undeniable. One evening, as Daniel sat reading across the room, I found myself staring at him, wondering whether he would ever look at me the way Mark had, whether he could ever hold me with Adrian's bold certainty. The questions gnawed at me, their answers buried in a silence I could not break. In the end, I kept the secret. I folded it into the corners of my mind, hidden beneath the ordinary rhythm of our days. But I knew it lived there, restless and unrepentant, a reminder of what I had chosen when I was alone at home that day. And sometimes, late at night, when the house fell into silence again, I whispered the truth only to myself. I made a choice I can never undo. Life resumed its rhythm, or at least the appearance of it. Daniel returned to his routines, slipping easily back into late nights at the office, muted dinners, and weekends consumed by errands. To anyone looking in from the outside, nothing had changed. But inside me, everything felt altered, unstable, as though the ground beneath our home had shifted. The memory of that day, Adrian's boldness, Mark's gentleness, lurked in the corners of my mind. It wasn't constant, but it surfaced in quiet moments, like when Daniel spoke absently about his schedule, or when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and remembered how alive I'd felt under their gaze. For weeks, I convinced myself it was over. A single mistake, a lapse born of loneliness. But temptation has a way of whispering when the silence grows too deep. One evening, as I walked back from the market, I saw them again. Adrian first, standing with that same self-assured posture, his voice carrying easily across the street. Mark was beside him, calmer, listening, his eyes catching mine before Adrian noticed. The recognition was instant, and with it came a surge of heat and dread. "Hey," Adrian called, stepping forward as if no time had passed. His smile was the same, confident, knowing, "We were just talking about you." Mark's glance was softer, more cautious, but no less piercing. "We didn't expect to see you tonight." My breath caught. I should have offered a polite nod and kept walking. But something in me slowed, betrayed by the same hunger that had betrayed me once before. We exchanged a few words, casual on the surface, but weighted beneath. Adrian teased lightly, reminding me of the wine we'd shared. Mark's silence said more than his words, his eyes carrying an unspoken question. When I finally excused myself and walked home, my pulse raced. I told myself it was nothing, just coincidence. Yet the truth pressed harder. Seeing them again had reignited what I had worked so hard to bury. That night, as Daniel sat across from me at dinner, discussing contracts and deadlines, I could barely focus. His words faded into background noise, while my mind replayed the way Adrian had looked at me, the way Mark's gaze had lingered. Guilt throbbed at the edges of my thoughts, but so did anticipation. In bed, Daniel turned away quickly, exhausted, and within minutes his breathing deepened into sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the possibility of another encounter. My body remembered the warmth of touch, my lips remembered the taste of risk, and my heart wrestled with a truth I was afraid to name. Part of me wanted it again. The days that followed were restless. I walked through the neighborhood more often, scanning streets with an eagerness I pretended not to feel. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them from afar. Once, Mark waved discreetly, a fleeting acknowledgement that left me shaken. Another time, Adrian's voice carried across the evening air, sending a chill through me I couldn't dismiss. Daniel, oblivious, carried on as always. He trusted me, perhaps too much, and that trust was a burden I no longer knew how to carry. Each time he kissed me goodbye in the mornings, the weight of what I had done and what I might do again pressed harder. The choice loomed before me like a door left ajar. To close it would mean silence, restraint, the slow erosion of longing in favor of loyalty. To step through would mean surrendering again, risking not just my relationship but the fragile stability of the life we had built. Late one evening, as I stood by the window watching shadows stretch across the street, I whispered to myself the question I couldn't ask anyone else. Was it truly a mistake, or the beginning of something I can no longer resist? The silence that followed offered no answer, only the promise of consequences waiting to unfold.